In this video, we're going to go into some more in-depth troubleshooting on ticket invoices on individual tickets. So all of this is going to take place under the invoice tab, and we're going to go over some of the options in here where you can see these magnifying glasses that take you to different pages, as well as the ability to come in and troubleshoot any of the issues in here. So we're going to go ahead and get started with our first segment. So in some cases, you may have a ticket that says it has a $0 total. This could be due to a couple of things, but the first thing we want to check is to make sure that this ticket is having the bill purchaser box checked. So by default, if you come into this invoice tab at the very bottom, you have bill purchaser and pay driver, which both should be checked. But if it's accidentally been unchecked, then you can see that we had our different rates here. We had this $877 bill that is now crossed out and is a 0 because we have not elected to pay the or bill the purchaser. But if we go ahead and click that bill purchaser and come into here, you can see that now we have this $877 bill in there for the rate per barrel. So you can, if you refresh this page and reload the summary here, you can see that that issue is gone. But that's probably the first thing you want to check if you have a ticket that is showing up as $0. Just make sure that the checkbox is checked properly. Probably the most common troubleshooting thing you're going to have to do is go through and make sure that the driver's measurements or other features are properly filled out in some cases on these with errors. So you can see right here I have this ticket that has an error, and we can come into the invoice tab and see exactly which problem is giving us right here. So we have rate per barrel is not calculating out on the invoice side, and subsequently the settlement side, because it's a percent, is not calculating out either. So in order to troubleshoot this, probably the easiest way to do it is to click on this magnifying glass, which will pull up a semi-intimidating window, but you kind of just walk and step through it carefully and you can understand what's going on. So this is the logic trace of how the rate per barrel was calculated for this ticket, which is set up inside the accounting management module. And usually these are preset and you never mess with them. But you can walk through here and see how this is being calculated out and where an error may be occurring. So right here, the first thing is if this is a reject load, then it's going to be 0, but it's not a reject load. So we have the highlighted yellow else. And then the next step right here, it says if loaded barrels is greater than 170, which it's not. So we're going to continue on, and we can kind of just follow this yellow path until we hit some of the red highlights. So we can in here see that it's the standard distance is greater than 0, and then something went wrong in this calculation. So it took 170, divided it by the total number of splits, which is probably 1, might be 2 in this case. But the problem right here is that you can see we have this highlighted missing price per barrel as a function of standard distance. So this is a common one if your rate sheets are not having the exact mileages in there, that this price per barrel as a function of standard distance will not calculate out properly, kind of breaking this thing. So we know what to look for. We're going to look for standard distance and see if our price per barrel is covering it. So if I come down here, back into the details tab and scroll down, you can see that our standard distance right here is 211.11, which is kind of a weird number that probably isn't being covered within our rate sheet. But in order to double check, we're going to go back up over into invoice. And inside of invoice, we can actually pull up the rate sheet that is being used to calculate this ticket. So if I click on that, it'll open up this window. And we'll cover this more in the accounting management modules for rate sheets, but we're just going to jump over into lookups. And you can see right here that we have a bunch of mileages. It doesn't look like we have any decimal places. We'll scroll down to the bottom really fast. And you can see that it actually stops at 200. So we have 211.11 or something. That's definitely not going to calculate out. Let's go ahead and change this to 200. Click enter to submit it. I'm going to refresh this invoice really fast. And if we jump back over to the invoice tab, you can see that now it's calculating out properly that we have a supported mileage. So that's kind of how these things go. And if I click into here now, you can see that it's the logic trace is going to have it be green instead of red because it calculated out successfully. So while these can be a little bit intense, pretty important and useful to be able to learn how to read these if you are troubleshooting where something went wrong. And in that case, it told us exactly what was missing. The other tab in here lets you potentially override minimum loads. So the minimum load, if we were to override it, and put it to 0, you could see that the logic trace, if we refresh it, looks like it automatically refreshed. If we come back in here into my rate per barrel, it looks like now the logic path is using this top path because the minimum load is, a lot smaller. So we'll go ahead and get rid of that. But in some cases, you can come in here and kind of manipulate it as needed to get it to go down the proper logic path and calculate out properly. But yeah, logic traces, pretty useful for figuring out what may be going wrong and letting you kind of know where to hunt in terms of driver measurements or anything else, what you should be looking at to troubleshoot those sorts of issues. Another common issue that may come up is a purchaser may ask you after they receive their invoice to go back and change something that is an invalid charge. A good example is wait time, which we'll see in here. And you go in and you change it and it's not refreshing properly and you kind of start scratching your head. So if that's the case, we'll show you how to fix that. So you can see here underneath the invoice that we have a $200 shipper wait time charge that is making our total over $1,000. But we have reviewed it. The purchaser said that's not a valid charge. It may have been a typo. And we review it, and that's the case. And I come over here into my measurements, and I'm going to change my wait time back down to 0. So I go ahead and do that. I refresh my invoice and everything, and I come over here into invoices, and lo and behold, we still have the $200 charge, and there's still over $1,000 bill on this invoice. So if that's the case, you may have noticed that there's a little lock icon right here next to invoice. This lock icon means that any changes that you make here will not be reflected in the totals that are getting used because the invoice has been submitted. That's also the case if I were to come in here and say, hey, actually, we just want to zero this out. If I come in and do that and put in the reason right here, you'll notice that even though I've changed it right here, the total is still over $1,000 because the invoice has been locked. So what we need to do in this case is go into here, into the invoice itself, which we can do by clicking on this invoice, the little magnifying glass up here. And this will open up a little view where you can kind of quickly see some stats on it. But what we want to do is open it up in a new tab. And once in here, I'm going to remove the submission feature, which will unlock the invoice. So back here, over here on the ticket page, I'm going to refresh it really quick, the page. You can see that we no longer have the lock icon right here, and the total is still 1,000. But now if we refresh with that override, you can see it's dropped down to 877. So we could go back and relock the invoice and kind of proceed business as normal. But whenever you see that lock icon right here, just know that any changes right here, either manually by clicking on the edit and putting in a number, or by changing the underlying data that would cause it to be calculated like a wait time or something, those will not be reflected in the total invoice because the invoice has been locked. So yeah, pretty tricky little issue there, but it kind of ensures that changes made down the road won't go back and change totals historically. That's the amount those paid for. So pretty useful to check for that little lock icon if you're getting any weird discrepancies there. Another common issue that may occur is that there is no rate sheet yet found for a ticket. So if I were to come into a ticket, sometimes up here you'll notice there's this banner that says no rate sheet found for a ticket. There might be also a red banner that says the invoice hasn't been calculated yet. But in either case, when I click on the little refresh right here, it says failed to calculate an invoice. Could not find a rate table for this ticket, and it gives some of the information in here. And if we scroll down, you can see that clearly these have not yet been calculated out yet. So when this occurs, probably the first thing you want to check is to go into this accounting application rules window right here and confirm that there are no application rules of any of the cascading priorities, and that's why it's not calculating out. Now, typically this can mean two different things. One, it means that there is not a rate sheet created for this, or a rate application rule rather created that's linking this up to a rate sheet, or two, it means that there's not one for the specific timestamps. So in this case, if I come into here, you're going to notice that there's these two red timestamps that have not been filled out. And this is kind of what's happened here. We don't have any timestamp data. And if I were to go ahead and put in, today's date on these, required date ranges and go back in to my invoice and refresh it, instead of getting an error this time, it's going to say the ticket's refreshed. And you can see as you come down here, I have a few different, it's calculated out at $500 right here. So the problem in this case was that my timestamps were missing rather than the rate sheet was missing. But sometimes the rate sheet would be missing, which we'll cover in the next video. Or not the next video, the next segment of this video. So in the previous part of the video, we showed an example where we were missing timestamps, and that's why we didn't have a rate sheet. In this case, now we still don't have a rate sheet, but we do have the timestamps. And whenever we go to refresh, you can see it gives us the same error message that there is no rate table. And if we click into the accounting application rules, although everything looks filled out, we do not have the proper, any application rules showing up here. So if that's the case, the next thing that we want to do is probably go in and actually look at those application rules. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to duplicate this tab really quick so we can come back to it. But I'm going to click in and I'm going to go into accounting and I'm going to go into accounting management. And we're going to check our invoice application rules. So in here, you can see we have a couple that are for our test purchaser, which back in this tab, you can see that's who we're working with, the test purchaser. But they're not working. Now, we do have a red flag right here that's probably going to be the case. We can see this date range is not applying, which, may be the case right there. But we're going to go in and use the Explore Application Rules page right here really fast. And you can see these are kind of our last tickets for the last 28 days. And we have one ticket that is not matching. Now, if I click on this, you can see it's that same ticket we've been working with here. And they're working, this ticket's in the 4th of February to the 4th of February. So we can see that there's no match right here. And back on this page, as you guessed it right here, we can see that this date range is passed. It's already been past the 31st, and that's probably what's going on here. So we're going to edit this, and we're going to say we meant the 31st of 2022. And if I go ahead and update that, then back over here, if I refresh, it's going to be successful this time. And if we kind of reload this tab right here, you'll see that we no longer have that banner. So in this case, the timestamps fell out of range. But this could have been a whole variety of different things related to this. You can come in and see that it could have been dates. It could have been the priorities didn't work out. It could have been that the cargo wasn't selected. But kind of the next thing to do, if your dates look good and everything, is to come in and check the actual application rules, which this applications rule tab is fairly useful in helping you kind of troubleshoot and find where there's no matches and seeing where, it may need to fall on that priority scale. Another case that may occur with conflicting rate sheets here is if you have duplicate rate application rules that are trying to compete with each other. So the indicator if that's occurring is when you refresh, if it says duplicate rate sheets are found for this ticket. Now, if we go into the accounting application rules and come into here, you can see that there are two rate sheet application rules that are kind of vying for priority here. And if we jump back over here into the accounting management module, go to invoice application rules and explore application rules, you can see that there is a ticket right here, this one ticket we've been working with, where there are duplicate matches for this region 5 priority, which you can see right here as well. So in order to rectify that, we can go in and we're going to take a look at our application rules, and you can see that we have two for the test purchaser where they may be competing. Now, this one right here, you can see it's got the date ranges that fall in, and it's the same cargo. And depending on what you're trying to do by having these different application rules, maybe this is supposed to be a special rate that is not for gauged or metered oil. Maybe it's actually supposed to be diesel prices. Or maybe actually this is a special rate that doesn't apply to everybody. Instead, it should only apply to pickup locations. And so you could change it in here. But whenever you have two that have the same priority and both apply, it's going to kind of air out. So in this case, I'm going to say that this applies only to the test pickup. And we're going to say it is for gauge and meter, but it's supposed to be kind of a special rate for that location. And after I do that, if I go back into this ticket here and kind of refresh it, it's going to refresh. I can get rid of that banner by jumping between tabs, and you can see everything worked out just fine, and we have it calculated out. And you can see in the invoice application rules what actually happened in this case is that special rate worked out for this specific location, the test pickup. So we have this priority 2 rate is what's being applied, whereas previously we just had this one. So that can happen. There can be a couple other things that may cause that, different cargoes and things like that. But if you have more than one application rule that is working in a specific, if it's matching to multiple that's the same priority, it's going to give you the error, so you go in and fix it. All right, so we've covered quite a few different troubleshooting methods in order to figure out why your ticket is not updating, or why it's not refreshing, or why it's giving you an error when you click on the refresh because it's missing a rate sheet or things like that. The last thing to cover is the manual overrides here. So sometimes there's just cases where you need to just go in and change a number for whatever reason, and luckily LoadCall's got you covered here. You have the ability on any of the invoice line items right here to come in and alter these as needed. So let's say we just want to change this. Instead of $50, we're going to do $20 for whatever reason. Usually in here, you'll have a reason for this. I'm going to just put in test, but you'd say, no, this override was requested by the customer. We can go ahead and put that in, and it's going to update. You can see right here, it'll automatically refresh for us. So our rate has dropped. Might be easier if I make this kind of an outrageous number. So let's make this $2,000. See, our overall charge is going to jump from $400 to $2,000. But the nice thing is LoadCall will always show you right here originally what this should have calculated out as. So this $50 charge should have been in there. So we can come in here and put in what we are wanting the charge to be. I'm going to put in a reason really fast, click override. And if it's the same as the default, the $50 is what should have calculated out. You're not going to have that reason over here on the side because it wasn't overridden. But you can go ahead and edit any of these, both on the invoice side or also on the settlement payout side, to be whatever they need to be as quick fixes and a way around things. It will log those changes out. If I jump over into logs, you can see I've got a lot of updates in here. We've been messing with these. So there is accountability here in case people are changing things, and it'll show if it's overridden. But in some cases, it's just what needs to be done. For whatever reason, the number's got to get changed, and we're not messing with rate tables or things like that. So that's kind of the last step on changing any of these things. In a previous video, we talked about how that lock icon would prevent this from happening, so that's something to be aware of. But generally, this is a pretty good way to go in and make any of those adjustments that may need to be made to make sure that your ticket invoices are perfect.